Call to order this May, 26th Planning Commission meeting. 25th? 25th. Now in session, we'll start as always with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I'll take roll call. We have Commissioner Newman.
She is here.
Commissioner Magai.
Here.
Commissioner Inga.
Present.
Chair Keldorf.
Here.
And Vice Chair Heschler is absent. We have quorum.
Thank you, Jasmine. Okay, we will start tonight with public communications. So this is the time in the meeting to talk about anything not agendized as a public hearing. Anybody wishing to speak, please come up, state your name and your address, and let's go.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Smith, and I live at 416 Kansas Street. 2 years ago, we, the neighbors in the area of Washington, Kansas, Holly, and California streets, heard about a new building that was going to go in at the corner of Grand, Kansas, and Holly streets. It was planned to be a big office building that was going to bring strangers into our backyard. We are grateful that the Planning Commission, the City Council, and Griffin Capital reached out and listened to our concerns and started looking at other options. I am here today to reiterate that we are still very interested in what is going to be built at this corner. We want to make sure that any decisions give priority to the consideration of safety of kids and families. Consider the impact to our schools, as well as traffic congestion and parking in the area, noting that one of our streets already has a parking permit program in place. And we ask that whatever is built there is in keeping with the current look, design, and density of the surrounding homes and residential community on the Washington, Kansas, Holly, and California streets. We thank you for your continued partnerships with our neighborhood and look forward to continued discussions about what is the best fit for this new addition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Hello. I'm Bill McCafferty at 517 Kansas. I fully support the previous speaker's comments in total. First of all, I want to thank each and every one of you for your service to the citizens of El Segundo. I know how hard it is to make decisions that don't please everyone all the time. Having served myself on the Recreation and Parks Commission as chair and chairman pro tem for over 20 years in this city, I'm well aware of the sacrifice you all make. Under my tenure as on the commission, we implemented the actual park we're talking about, the Holly, Kansas Park, as an island of safety and recreation, basically nestled within the residential area which surrounds the park on 3 sides. The primary factor for the expenditure of the city funds at that time for the park was its key residential location and limited vehicular traffic. Our target audience for the park, if you're familiar with, which I'm sure you are, was our youngest citizens, toddlers, preteens. The fact that there was minimal vehicular traffic was a paramount factor for the City Council's approval to go ahead with the park as you see it today. The current proposal before you will negate the purpose of that Holly, Kansas Park existence and create a serious hazard for children and surrounding residential residents. I respectfully request that you take all considerations before moving ahead with this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McCafferty.
I'm too short. My name is Isla Durmanovski, and we live at 301 Kansas Street. The vision of the residents in and around the Holly, Kansas neighborhood is that the development of the former International Rectifier and Finian property and any other projects in the immediate area be a safe, sensible, and sustainable addition to the neighborhood and to the wider El Segundo community. Safe before construction, taking adequate means to secure the property so that it does not contribute to crime in the community. Safe during construction so that any environmental hazards are mitigated. No soil, water, air, or noise pollution negatively affecting the neighborhood or El Segundo in the short or long term, to include our potential future neighbors on the property. Safe after construction, ensuring ample parking as well as traffic and congestion on the residential streets and into the main grand artery of El Segundo. Sensible, the property should fit the character and aesthetics of the surrounding residential neighborhood and community and not create such an influx of units that it creates an undue burden on the community's resources, schools, services, and utilities. Sustainable, construction should look to minimize the impact on the environment by incorporating techniques that meet the widely recognized green practices, as well as the operation of the site that includes adequate green space offsets that push overall complex to be carbon neutral. By embracing this vision, El Segundo can lead the way in transforming this former industrial property into usable space that benefits this community. But it is crucial that it be done in a safe, sensible, and sustainable way to preserve the town's unique character within the larger urban landscape.
Thank you, Isla.
A little bit taller than my wife. Hello, I'm Andy Durmanovski, also at 301 Kansas, and I just want to say thank y'all for taking the time to listen to us. We happen to live right across from potential development, and as my wife has already come here to say, safe, sensible, and sustainable. We know something has to happen on this property, but we want to make sure that it fits the environment and contributes to what is El Segundo, why we came here to this community. I've lived all over the world, and you know, when it was time to come here to be at LA Air Force Base, we've bought into this location because of what El Segundo is, and I don't want to see that changed. I want this to be an added addition to our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Chelsea Motol, and I live at 1405 Elan Point, directly across from Kansas Holly Park. You're welcome to knock on my door anytime to say hello. I'm here in solidarity with my fellow neighbors expressing concern about the upcoming new Catalyst project. The recommended 350 rental unit, which is a 6-story building kitty-cornered to my home in our park. It's the hope that if we share our concerns and ideals early, that we can work together to ensure that our neighborhood design is at the forefront of all of our efforts, rather than the nice to have that it happened to be when Catalyst first introduced itself with a commercial property. I will never forget when I first met you, Michelle, at our very own park. It was a pleasure, truly. You came up to me and you asked, Chelsea, what's important to you? And I said, any and all issues that have to do with my kids and our kids of our neighborhood, and we believe that this is the biggest issue yet that would affect them. I come to you a bit worried. I worry about the quality of our community with 350 rentals. I know personally and can name 60 plus children in a 2-radius block, 23, 3 on the way on Elan Point. 350 families is a quality control issue, not recognizing our neighbors, renters passing through, the volume effect on our schools, our police force, etc. I worry about the increased traffic that will undoubtedly occur with only 380 proposed parking spots on that property. I worry about my kids crossing the street with speeding cars driving by, trying to get a shortcut to work or home. I worry about the reported detrimental toxins and contaminated soil from the property that were reportedly so terrible residential wasn't even on the table not long ago. What air will our kids breathe when we're taking walks or enjoying our park? I worry about a 6-story building that takes away our sunlight as it towers over the park and over our homes and over our streets. As we enter seemingly early stages of this project, I hope you see my family and my neighbors not as naysayers of any project to hit this corner, but as advocates for what you, as city planners, work so hard to maintain. As I mentioned to Griffith Capital's consultant, Kristen Lahner, we want to work with Griffin Capital to create what makes sense for our neighborhood, a residential community with the character of that which exists, a residential community like Elan Point. I love living on Elan Point. Coming from a large condominium complex in Playa del Rey, it's a night and day difference. I know every single family on our little street, especially the kids. We have events like holiday barbecues, Friendsgivings, progressive dinners, karaoke, birthday parties, chalk parties, even late night wine chat sessions on that block. Again, you're welcome to knock on my door. My kids can play in the street, and my son even learned to ride a bike just yesterday on that street. I have been on both sides of this. These are things that I couldn't do in our Playa del Rey community complex. I get to be a part of a neighborhood that further fosters relationships, safety, community. My kids get to grow up knowing one another. I don't want to dilute that. There has never been a structure like this in El Segundo, and it certainly should not be in our backyards right in the heart of a residential neighborhood. I truly believe that a property like Elan Point is a great point of reference, one that wouldn't be a settling point, but truly an enhancement to our community. This proposed plan will affect our children. I hope we can work together to ensure that it happens in a positive way for all. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Good evening. My name is Charizard Mosi, and I live at 311 Kansas. I am here also in support with my neighbors regarding the Holly Grand Kansas project. I am a proud El Segundo resident. I am a proud mother and a proud member of this community. And I am also concerned about, all of the information that we've received about the proposed project, and I'm looking forward to gaining more information from Griffin Capital in writing about their proposition and how they're going to help support our community in being the unique community that El Segundo is, and also asking for your support to keep El Segundo the community that it is, and so that it doesn't turn into another big city, because that's not who we are as El Segundo. So thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Irene Sanchez. I live at 303A Kansas Street. I'm a member of the HOA. I was asked to come here to give my thoughts on the project. I was interviewed yesterday by two ladies from Griffin, and I told them all my concerns. My concerns have to do with density, have to do with the fact that they're providing 350 units and only 375 parking spots. I know in our unit and in our group of townhouses, most everybody has 2 cars and maybe 3 cars, because when you have a couple of adults and they go to work, so 350 or 375 is not nearly enough parking. I'm concerned about the density situation. I'm concerned about the strangers in the neighborhood. Renters come and go. They asked me what I would consider, what I thought should go in there, and I said, well, townhouses like there are now in Elan Point and ours. And I was told that that's not monetarily feasible, meaning they wouldn't get enough from their investment. So and I also am concerned about the traffic. They said that the exit was going to be on Grand. Well, Grand in Kansas is already an intersection that has numerous accidents. There are There have been numerous accidents at Grand Tropez and Grand. So now if you add another exit onto Grand, there's likely to be chaos and certainly more traffic accidents, more police activity. It's just not a very good situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez.
Hi, my name is Kathy Stabile. I live at 408 California Street, and my husband and I have lived there for 43 years. So we watched Grand Tropez be built, we watched Elon Point be built, we watched Kansas Grand be built. Those all fit into the neighborhood. It didn't impact California Street. The proposed project from Catalyst just does not fit into our neighborhood. And as I look out here, I see so many of our neighbors, which is so unique in most cities, that neighbors actually know each other. So I really, really hope that between the planning committee, Catalyst, and the neighborhood, that we all can come together with some sort of agreement on what fits best in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Hi, my name's Brett Ryan. I live at 400 California Street with my family. Thank you for hearing our concerns. I appreciate it. We moved to El Segundo more than a quarter of a century ago, and although we're surrounded by Lax, Hyperion, and Chevron, we were attracted to the peaceful environment, the family-oriented community, and the welcoming atmosphere that has represented El Segundo for decades. We've raised 2 children here, enjoyed many friendships in the community, sports teams, small town charm, and the city, which is unique in the metropolis of sprawling Los Angeles. It's a gem. It's a hidden oasis, a respite from the hustle and bustle of our urban surroundings. We have friends that call it Mayberry, and would love to have the lack of congestion that we all enjoy here. We have the Holly Kansas Park next to us, where our children have spent hours, and now listen to our families around us who enjoy with their children the serenity and the quiet, safe, and restful neighborhood that the community has with close-knit friends. Like our neighbors, we've invested our life savings to buy our house, and it is a central part of our lives. We put our hope and our trust in this community and built our lives around it. We're now facing the prospect of a significant capital project, Griffin Capital Project, a development across the street from the Holly Kansas Park that several of us have mentioned, that's such a gem and an oasis and an enjoyable place for us. Please understand that we do welcome a replacement for what exists now. However, the magnitude of the development is sobering, and it would transform our residential neighborhood and the serenity we treasure forever. The construction of this many apartments next to single-family homes will have a negative impact on the quality of life and the way that we exist in our neighborhood as it is now. There are so many concerns expressed by residents that we've talked about, and I'll address just a couple. Others have touched on many of them as well. But the sudden influx of this many residents is going to be increased noise, traffic, congestion, a strain on our infrastructure, delayed response from police and fire. Our school district, can our school district handle extra residents at this level? Will it increase the size of classes and the congestion that that'll create? I'm going to skip over a little bit because some of the things have been mentioned already. The soil report is a huge concern for me. The report was quite sobering when we first read it. Capital stressed and made it very clear to us during their initial commercial plan that it could never be used for residential because the soil was so toxic. And if you look into the soil report, it is really significant. It's a concern for residents and potential people that live on that area. And also during the construction phase, it would be a liability for residents and health issues. There's also a concern with a property that's built this large, the effect on our property values. And I think if any of you were looking for a new house, would you buy a house that's next to residential neighbors, or would you buy one that's got a 6-story apartment complex overlooking you. I think the effect on our residential values and future property would be quite significant. So again, we welcome this development. It wouldn't be appropriate to have such a huge development they're planning, but we're looking for a gradual transition from the residential to the Smoky Hollow area, and something that fits into the neighborhood environment. I would just ask you how you would feel if you were living in your house and a 6-story apartment was about to be built next door. It's a big concern to us, and obviously it's a big talking point, and that's why we support our neighbors and why we're here. So we're in your hands, we're at your mercy. We're asking you to preserve our quality of life and the environment that we have at this point in time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brett.
Good evening. My name is Victor Valdez. I live on Ellen Point. You've heard it mentioned before. And again, I want to thank our Planning Commission for listening to all our neighbors. We've organized. We are very concerned about the impact that this development that is being advocated by their special consultant, she's already telling us it's a done deal. Now, how can that be? We already know the property has a demolition order. Next week, there's another meeting. They're going to demo that thing, put it ahead of the curve. You can see we're here all concerned. I'm the association president. We have 18 families living there, children. Chelsea did a great job in discussing all of us here. So we're very organized, and we're all against a major development like this. Obviously, the strategy that they are trying to do is, hey, we're going to give you 350, we'll knock it down to 100, maybe 150. Even that isn't realistic. You heard the echo of convert it to a Ellen Point type facility, residence. There's an investment group. That's what REIT means. It's a real estate investment group. They spent almost $50 million for that piece of property in 2013. Now they're concerned. They want a return on their investment. Let's keep it a residential community of what we are known for. A small community where we all know one another and care about one another's families. You spoke to our group. We care about you too. We know all of you care about this community and what it represents. And once again, thank you on behalf of the City of El Segundo and our Ellen Point neighbors. Take care.
Thank you, Victor.
Hi, I'm Heather Putnam. I'm from 423 Kansas Street, and I just want to say thank you to you guys. I've been watching you. We've got like 30 plus of us back here, and you guys are not even blinking. And I really am impressed that you're taking our heartfelt concerns seriously, right? You're not on your phones. You really care, and I'm grateful for that. And like with them, I've been here over 25 years, and I remember when Jim and Jack's was where the Kansas Grand is in Ellen Point, and I remember being worried about what was going to go up, and then what was up there was better and improved, and then each of the complexes, and everything keeps getting better. And so I just want to tell you guys, we are putting our faith and trust in you guys. You haven't let us down so far. Every time in our neighborhood, when Kansas Holly Park was redone, it got better. And when the neighborhoods across the street got redone, Ellen Point, Grand Kansas, Grand Tropez, they've all enhanced our area. So let's keep that going, and thank you for listening to all of us.
Thank you, Heather.
Hello, my name is Connie Pate. I live at 1356 East Mariposa. I just had time and decided to come because I love my community. And first of all, I just wanted to, I'm not like up to date on a lot of things here, but I just want to bring up a couple of things. And one is the new parking decals on certain streets in the area is a good thing. I think that's wonderful. I'm also concerned or would like to know if it's possible for all residents in the area to have parking decals. I think that would help because I myself experienced people parking in front of my house for days and, you know, nothing I can do about it. But my husband and I are both handicapped. We have a hard time finding parking. I applied for handicap, the blue parking for my, in front of my house. I was denied, we're both denied. So I just think it'd be I just think it's a good idea if we can all have parking decals for those who live in the community, where we can at least have a place to park, and also for safety concerns of people parking overnight, people parking and going to the airport. I know a lot of people doing it. I retired from the airport. And also the other concern I have is about the homeless. I don't know what El Segundo does for the homeless or what they do to prevent them from coming into our area. Being a homeowner, living here over 25 years, we spend a lot of money here. And I would just like to know what's going on with that, or where I can get the information. If I can help, I'm willing to help our community. I love our community, and I want everyone to be safe. And I just want to move forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie.
Hello, thank you. I'm Pat Curry. I live at 412 Washington Street. I've lived in El Segundo 55 years, 25 years at this residence. Seen a lot of changes, some good, some not so good. I know change has to happen. We're living near this International Rectifier building. To be honest, when it was operational, we didn't have people parking on our street. They didn't really even know they were there. Jim and Jack's always been, but parking has become a nightmare. I've filed petitions twice with the city for permit parking before it was even given to the street next to us. It's terrible. We can't find parking. That's a minimal thing. This building, 350 units, would really affect us. It's huge. That's as many residents from my house to Center Street and Mariposa. It's just, I don't even know how it could be considered. Height restrictions, let's remember the residential height restrictions. I know you're the planning department. Ellen Point, something like that would be great. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Anybody else wishing to speak? Oh, yes, no, don't apologize.
Hi, my name is Jim D Cordova. I've been a longtime resident of El Segundo. Actually, I started coming to El Segundo in 1964, so I've seen a lot of growth in the city. But I own rental property in El Segundo as well. I have 2 buildings, and I think there's a few things, and hopefully the city will do a study on this. But what I don't think people realize is where I have my buildings, there's a lot of rentals. It's on Loma Vista, and there's an alleyway behind my apartment buildings. And what happens is when you have a lot of rentals, a lot of them have a lot of turnover. And unfortunately, with rental property, and I've been there 20 years, people tend to move out and leave stuff. And if somebody put 350 rental units in that small confined area over there, given my experience with what happens when people move quickly, they leave couches, they leave beds, that draws rats, that draws vermin. That's just one of the issues that I would hope that the city will pay close attention to if they consider multiple units over there. The other thing is we have street sweeping. And can you imagine if you had 350 units there of cars that will bleed out into the street no matter what you try to do? Say, I have parking for everybody. Well, they won't. So when street sweeping day comes, for instance, I live at 421 Washington, When street sweeping day comes where on our street, people have to move their cars. Well, where do they move their cars? They move them to the side streets. Well, so when you have street sweeping on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday for the other areas in our neighborhood, where do they put their cars? They put their cars on Washington, California, Kansas. It would be a parking nightmare just to deal with the street sweeping. You have trash collection. Where do they go to get access? People have to move their cars. Sometimes the trash guys can't get to it. And the last thing is, can you imagine if you have a multi-story building and these folks all have to go to work 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning to exit that building, that multi-level structure. How are they going to get out onto Grand Avenue? As a matter of fact, if you think about it, if there was an emergency, how would people get out of there? How would any of us get out of there? Remember, there's very few streets that get out onto Grand Avenue. So I would just ask the Planning Commission, think about the things that are kind of below the line, things that, you don't normally see, the little things. I think it would really make a big difference if you consider and start to make a list of all the little things that grow to be big things if you allow something like that in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else wanting to speak? Come on up. Okay, with that, we will close public comments. I think I speak for all of us. Genuinely, it's good to have you here. We do this just about every other Thursday, and it is rare that we have many visitors. So even though it consumed the entirety of public communications, it really is nice to have you here. I'm a big believer in this feedback loop. It is painful to talk into a void. So despite the fact that this project is not before us tonight, it is not agendized to be before us at any time that I know of in the near future, it is helpful to hear your comments. I would like to ask Mr. Allen if you could let us know from a staff perspective if Catalyst has been presented or discussed with staff, if Griffin Capital has been in to show a revised project at all.
Sure. And Chair, I share your sentiment. It is nice to see a packed house for the Planning Commission, and we have another very exciting, or two additional exciting topics tonight, a presentation and a discussion on downtown specific plans. So if you have time tonight, stick around for those other exciting topics and considerations that the Planning Commission will be deliberating on tonight. But the Catalyst project, staff is familiar with the few year history initiated by Catalyst or the Griffin Capital Group with the commercial project a couple years ago. And we are familiar that they are starting an outreach campaign. They have a consultant doing some engagement or community engagement with the residents. We have had very limited conversations with the group other than them informing staff that they have started this process. They have a residential project in mind. They're going to have to reinitiate or re-kick off an environmental process. And so there's a long laundry list of things that they need to do before they ever come formally talk to staff. But we do hear from them as they update us on, we're meeting with the community, this is what our timing is or what we're thinking. They're also working through the Department of Toxic Substance Control, which is the state agency. And so we have a vague familiarity with some of the conversations that are happening, but other than that, there is not a scheduled public hearing. There's not an application in our hands that we're actively reviewing anything. We don't have anything to review at this point. I think some of you might know more than we do. I know that they're talking about a project of upwards to 350 residential units. I heard some things tonight that I hadn't heard before about the parking counts, and so it sounds like there's some moving targets. Griffin Capital is still formalizing what their project scope is going to be. My hope is that this informs a lot of what their next steps are going to be. Staff is here to hear the feedback, and similarly, our job is really to be a repository of this information, and when and if Griffin Capital does come and submit an application, we can work with them to address the community concerns, provide the analytical data or analysis of these things, or ensure that they are studied properly. And so I would encourage you to stay involved, communicate with Griffin Capital what your concerns are, wishes are, needs are, and continue to show up at these meetings so that we can hear that as well. We can share, our contact information as well so that you can keep in contact with staff as the conversation progresses. So that, other than that, I don't have a whole lot of other context or timing information.
Mr. Allen, have you seen the flyer that she's circulating, their consultant?
No,
No. There's actually a flyer that's
So-
showing the 350 apartment.
Please, for
Mr.
folks in
Valdez.
the audience,
I know, if you can have that communication with him
if anyone wants
after.
to speak, you need to be recognized by the chair. And I just want to say, for Brown Eye purposes, as the chair mentioned, not on the agenda, so there's very little sort of maneuverability we have in discussing this topic. So if you have
So
anything
again,
to
yeah,
add, I think we should wrap
I'm
it
happy to
up.
give my contact information out to anybody who needs it, and we can, there's been several members of the community who I've already spoken to, and so I'm happy to continue those conversations.
And can I ask, one thing that was brought up was the parking program. Can you refresh our memory? It's a pilot program with parking permits in that Holly, Kansas
City
area.
Council recently permanently adopted that
Okay.
program.
So that is in place. And as Mr. Allen said, on tonight's agenda, we are getting a staff presentation on both the Civic Center Plaza and the downtown specific plan. It would be great for you to stick around and provide feedback on that when those projects are coming up as an agendized item. Additionally, this site that you're talking about is part of the Smoky Hollow specific plan currently. There will be a future update on that as well, and that's a document that does address zoning in the entirety of that area, and this property is included in that. So that might also be something to look for in the foreseeable future. I will disclose, I met with Griffin Capital and a potential developer maybe as long as 18 months ago, and that was the last that I've heard about this project in general. So again, you do probably know much more than we do. I don't know if anybody else has spoken with them recently, but I don't believe so. Okay. With that, I think we will move on to written communications. We did receive one. Was there anything additional to that?
There was a total of 3, all for item I3.
Thank you. Okay, and has everybody had time to review those? Those are specific to what we are discussing next. Okay, great. Okay, next item up, our consent calendar. It's just the meeting minutes from April 27th. Can I take a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Okay,
And I'll take votes. We have Commissioner Newman,
Yes.
Commissioner Magai,
Yes.
Commissioner Inga,
Yes.
and Chair Keldorf.
aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Perfect. Okay, continued business, public hearings, seeing none. New business, we'll start with the presentation of the Civic Center Plaza Design Project from our El Camino College students.
Chair Kildorf and fellow commissioners, just wanted to let you know that we've been collaborating with Professor Mark Eber from El Camino College for the last few months. In one of his classes, a studio design class, he had some students put together designs on the Civic Center Plaza. This was just a class project. It's not directly related to what we're doing for the downtown specific plan. But because Mr. Eber lives here in the city, he thought that might be a good idea for his students to work on a design. So because we worked with them and they put in a lot of time in their designs, we thought it would be a good idea for the students to kind of go over their designs with you, and that way they can get some recognition for their hard work, okay? At this point, I'll just recognize Professor Eber to just give you a quick word and introduce the students. And then we'll have them each come in and give you a quick presentation.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mark Eber, resident of El Segundo. I'm also an urban designer and a professor of architecture and environmental technology at El Camino College. I am joined tonight by a talented group of second-year architecture students who are here to offer some visions for reimagining El Segundo's Civic Plaza. After meeting with the planning staff to discuss design criteria and documenting and analyzing existing conditions, the students engaged in a design process to reimagine your plaza. What you will see in these presentations are a number of terrific ideas to consider before the city engages in a redesign process. That's right, these are not actual proposals before you. Instead, they are developed as visions to help frame a conversation about what you want to see in a redesigned plaza. So sit back and enjoy the reimagining of your community space. Hello, my name is Dylan Baird. I'm a student at El Camino College. I first off just want to say thank you for giving us the time to share our ideas and concepts for your guys' Civic Center. I know you guys have a very busy schedule, but you know, like my professor has said, we've worked really hard on this, and we really want to give you guys some ideas and inspiration. My project is called Take Flight. It is taking after two large historical contexts of the area, and that is the tradition of the blue butterfly, as well as the significance of Douglas aircraft to the community and the growth of the community, bringing people and jobs here and residents here. I plan to incorporate both of those strategies into creating sculptures that represent the taking flight of the residents and the growth of the community. I decided to use very geometric forms made of metallic materials as to represent aerospace, and I started off with a very literal form of the butterfly for these sculptures I'll have flowing through this project. So if you can go to the next slide, you can kind of see what I got. So the idea of Take Flight, like I said, is representing the history of El Segundo, but also the growth of it. I have 3 butterfly sculptures that transition through the actual city plaza. I have one all the way in the back that is acting as sort of an amphitheater. I know you guys have talked about wanting to have more public events, speakers, maybe even live music here. At certain times, I know you guys also have the Christmas tree lighting, and I have seen some local music here before. So I really want to have a space in the back that acts as an amphitheater. You can kind of see I have the first butterfly sculpture acting as that amphitheater. It looks like it's grounded right now, about to take flight. The one in the middle is, starting to come off of the ground, starting to really take flight. And then the one right at the entrance, it is almost fully in flight, and it's starting to kind of take a turn. And I really want to represent the taking flight of the planes from the local airport, and how, when you take flight over the ocean from LAX, you start to turn, and you can kind of turn, and you'll see all of El Segundo, all of the South Bay. And then with the actual landscape, I really want to include vegetation of buckwheat, which is an actual source of food and nutrition for the blue butterfly, as well as I want to include deciduous trees because they offer great natural shade. I really wanted the front of this property to be really open and really welcoming to people that are walking through. I know there's been a lot of development recently, and there's a lot of shops, restaurants nearby, and the Civic Plaza is really in the heart of it, of course, so I wanted an area that was inviting, that really, mixed well with the wonderful surrounding community. And then also, as well as, having a very open plaza for both, people coming and, being invited into the area. I also want to have lowered seating as well to provide a little bit of privacy for people that maybe want, come and, have lunch there, or, have their own private space, as well as being very open to the public. So this is my reimagining of the El Segundo Civic Plaza. Take flight.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you. Are we imagining this as a Q&A? No, okay. Okay. We'll have a little dialogue about it. Perfect, okay. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jose Mejia, and I wanted to present Departing March. When it's located here in El Segundo, of course, right outside, and I wanted to first imagine designing a new structure here or a new plaza. I wanted to actually visit the site and sit down and see how the sun moved around, where the winds came from, and most importantly, what type of people came and visited, what their families, workers, etc. That made me drive into the history of El Segundo, as previously mentioned, the Blue Butterfly, and this being the aerospace center city. It kind of inspired me to go into the concept of taking flights, which made me start designing other models and little sketches. And the base work came from a case study called The Platform, which kind of inspired a lot of my design. Okay, so what I envisioned were 5 particular specific parts in this new plaza, and that went into the different people that visited. The first one was a lounging space for workers or for you guys that came here, and lunch breaks, because there's a lot more open restaurants around and etc. So a place for you guys to eat, sit down, have a conversation. And then currently going on right now, I wanted to create a space where the farmers market kind of bled into the new plaza, as shown out there. And after that, one day when I was sitting down, I saw a bunch of band kids presenting in front of the public, and I wanted to give them a little stage to kind of present and have open questions or performances. And then, of course, little fountain just for a more cool climate. After that, I wanted to create the main attraction, which was the gathering place. And this structure, shown in mostly the elevations, kind of depicts the fluttering of a butterfly or the takeoff of a plane. Showing that, I made the materials basically out of 2 things, which was wood and acrylic paneling. This allowed for lights to be put in through the structure that kind of gave a display on the ground, also seen at LAX with these cylinder tubes. And also, last thing, I saw a lot of moms with their kids, so I wanted to include a grass area for them to play around with, a little playground. And with that, I wanted to show you the outcome of how that would look and what that would represent for El Segundo. And thank you.
Thank you, Jose.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ethan Parker. This is my project, Cohesion. Cohesion is the idea of bringing 2 things together, whether they're similar or different. And I kind of wanted to use that as a target point for the contrasting values that the city has, starting off with industry versus residential. We have the power plant right at the ocean, 2 very contrasting things. Just going along with that, like was said before, this is the heart of the city. So I kind of wanted to take advantage of the traffic, foot traffic, vehicle traffic, bring the person's eye to the plaza. So the way I went about this is I took inspiration from the power plant, the mechanical structures, piping, stacks. I saw very contrasting movement, figures, all that. So I wanted to use those to represent people of the city or different aspects of the city. Next slide. So here, I wanted to use some bold contrasting colors to invite the eye, invite the people to the plaza. So these organic forms I used to represent the differences in the city, mostly as people. And the cuboidal landscape area in the back, I use that to kind of represent the hominess of El Segundo. So the view from Main Street, I kind of wanted to use as a great point as to imagine yourself in the ocean on a boat, looking through the power plant, and you're looking into the city of El Segundo. Some opportunities and constraints. There was no shading, so I decided to put some shading along the landscaped area. We have a stage in the back for presentations, meetings, performances, the whole nine, accompanied with greenery and everything like that as well. But that is about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan.
Mic check. How's it going, guys? My name is Drew Regular, and my proposal for this reimagining of El Segundo Civic Plaza is titled Plaza Liftoff. Now, the typical experience for these El Segundo residents is it's a very lively community. Personally, I am not from here. I am from Carson, but I did not want to change the user's experience. I just wanted to enhance it. So after multiple site visits, starting with my site analysis, I started with the sun and the wind diagram. Obviously, the sun rises in the east, falls in the west, so that means there's going to be constant light throughout the center of the plaza. And I believe that that is going to be one of the main constraints. So I just wanted to tackle more of more shade, more seating, and stuff like that. And from there, we got onto the circulation. I was studying the circulation typical route of the pathways of the users there. And I noticed that if you're handicapped or in a wheelchair, there is going to be only one entrance to the center of the plaza, and I wish I had a laser, but it's going to be towards the left. So if you are coming from the east side, you will have to wrap around the whole plaza just to enter the middle if you are in a wheelchair, and I found that very challenging. And of course, the last one I had is just going to be nodes, edges, and barriers, which means I just highlighted the main three entrances to the plaza. Now from there, with the site analysis, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. So with that information, I've noticed that El Segundo has multiple historic iconographies. Oops, sorry. We have the blue butterfly, of course. We have the chevron, the refinery, and something that I read and that I learned was that it is the aerospace capital of the world. And I found that very interesting. So I wanted to revolve my whole concept around that specific term, and that term is going to be called astrionics. And astrionics, for those who don't know, is going to be the science and technology that's going to be put into the aircrafts. Now, metaphorically speaking, if El Segundo is the aircraft, the science and technology is going to be the users, of course. Now, on to the concepts. So, I wanted to, of course, tackle very specific criteria, seating, shade, and a couple months ago, last year, you guys released a video, as I believe it's called like a community workshop, and something that you guys, or the residents wanted was a central green, passive play areas, and of course, coincidentally, a farmer's market stop. And with those, I kind of stopped on this case study called District Cultural Square by ARC SD. And this president really drove my concept design because it has a unique geometry and it creates special experiences. And this is located in Hong Kong. And with that, I want to propose to you guys Plaza Liftoff. All right, so to break it down, the three most basic fundamentals of flight. You have the liftoff, you have the cruise, and of course you have the landing. And I've seen many opportunities with that. So starting from the very far left, we have the liftoff phase, which is where you go up in grade and you are welcomed into this plaza. And again, in that community workshop, they wanted a sign. So you can kind of see in the elevation. And it is going to say El Segundo. It represents a sort of hierarchy, and it just welcomes you into that. Blue, of course, blue butterfly. Nothing here is going to be random. So with that, After the liftoff, you have the cruise, which I believe is going to be the most experiential parts of a flight. Obviously, you're not going to be looking straight if you're in an airplane. You're going to be looking left and right, and that's kind of why I wanted to go here. So I wanted to have some organic shapes to mimic fluidity of air that was cut by the wing, some seating, some multifunctional stage. So starting from the top, we do have the raised grass for kids to be playing in, passive play. We, of course, have some buckwheat, which, of course, all you guys already know is what the blue butterfly feeds on. And, of course, on the very top right, you do have fountains using recycled water. You don't want to have any waste here. And, of course, the grand and hierarchy of this plaza is going to be this main wing-shaped structure, which is proposed to be crafted with aluminum and perforated metal. Now, on to the very last part of a flight. Of course, you have the landing. So the change in elevation in this plaza really gave me an opportunity for that. So going down to the very final part of the stage, you do have the landing. You are changing in grade, which you are welcomed with some stairs, of course, and my personal favorite is going to be the stadium seating. It does act as stairs, and of course, it acts as stairs and seating as well, of course. And I believe that this created more opportunity for gatherings, assemblies, etc. And moving on to the sections, you can kind of see with the changing grades there, how it goes from very high up in elevation to the far right, and as it goes lower. And with that, we have some outcome renders of how it's supposed to look. And I actually did provide a video, so you can physically see how this is going to look. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much, Drew. Thank you. Thank you for being here. That's very impressive. A long time ago, I was an urban planning student, and if I had any spatial awareness, I would have focused on design. So I appreciate your efforts. I'm curious, before just asking for comments or conversation from my fellow planning commissioners, has there been any contact with our consultant who is actually working on the Civic Center Plaza downtown specific plan about incorporating some of these ideas or concepts into what they already are visioning?
So I'm aware of, actually I know quite a few folks at RMM. I used to sit on the APA California board, so I became very familiar with the firm. It's also a part of my practice. I do know Jamie, I think, is the lead. And so we had a few exchanges. She's aware of it, but we haven't really talked about kind of incorporating some of these ideas as part of the component that's embedded within the specific plan.
I think one thing I saw is the consistency of this amphitheater stage idea, and I don't actually remember that being part of what we went through, right? So
I'm sure glad we don't have to make any decisions about the four presentations tonight. They were all super, very, very well thought out. And then you guys certainly did your homework to understand the community that you were about to design something for. Great use of that space out there. Very, very well done.
thank you for sharing that, and I hope you all got A's.
Same here. I'm very impressed with each of the designs. Thank you for bringing it to us. I mean, congratulations to each of you.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. This is really good stuff. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness into kind of every aspect of what's happening. I mean, what we have now is fine, right? But then, you know, I don't know that the thoughtfulness went into how it's designed. So this has me even more excited on how we're going to end up redesigning it. But this is all stellar stuff. Thank you.
Agreed. Yes, thank you for your time.
My
Very
pleasure.
well done.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is a presentation by Paul on a study session on the downtown specific plan draft.
If you just give me a moment to set up my presentation, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. And we'll give the folks a chance to take their models back.
Is it okay? Are you gonna go? Can we take a 5-minute break? Right? Okay.
Can we take a picture with the
So we'll be unofficially reopened. And Paul, before you get going, it's been proposed that given the length of your presentation and how meaty it's going to be, and without Mr. Heschler being here, perhaps we break it into two parts. Do the private property portion today and the public property portion at a future meeting.
Okay.
So it's something, would anybody be interested in making a motion on that?
Propose a motion that we get potentially halfway through, find about a halfway spot, and then we can cover the rest of it at the next meeting, I would assume.
Sure.
I second that.
And I'll take votes. Commissioner Newman,
Aye.
Commissioner Inga,
Yes.
Commissioner Magai,
Aye.
and Chair Kildorf.
Yes,
Motion passes 4-0.
thank you.
Okay. Okay, good evening, Chair Kildorf and fellow commissioners again. The purpose of this item before you is for staff to present to you the draft downtown specific plan for your comment and for the community. We released the document last week on the city website, and we sent out some email bulletins to let people know. The document will be available online for people to review and provide comment for the next month or so, so no rush on getting us comments. We wanted to schedule this meeting so that in addition to people seeing it online, we can give everybody a summary of what's in there, just to get them familiar with it before they kind of dig into the details. With that, I will go ahead and just get started with a presentation and try to rush through all these slides. And feel free to stop me if you have questions on something specific. But then we can also stop and get your comments and get comments from the community. Okay, great. So first things first, where is this? It's the downtown specific plan area. If you look at the top of the screen, there's an area that's highlighted in pink. That is not in the existing downtown specific plan, the one that was adopted in 2000. In this particular study and specific plan, we're proposed to add more space to the downtown specific plan. And I've highlighted some of the properties, the Chase Bank property, the Rite Aid property, and across the street, the hardware store. That's just a sense to give people a sense of what part of the city we're talking about.
Paul, can I ask a question straight away? That area you are looking to add to the downtown area, and then if you just went up a little bit further, up the street a little bit further, there was discussion about the Ali'i, the sushi restaurant across the street, and the baseball academy.
Okay.
Is there a reason then that we've stopped at Rite Aid and we haven't continued on up the street to include that in the downtown area?
That
Given
seemed to be
there's so much marketing, I mean, like the demarcation, is there a reason that we've stopped there and not moved on to where Starbucks is and on all the way up for the other retail potentials? Because what happens in the downtown certainly affects what happens there on Grand Avenue.
The reason was that this was immediately adjacent to the existing downtown area, and eucalyptus seemed to be a natural sort of point where there was this kind of a shift. If you remember, on eucalyptus on the northeast side is where the rec park property begins, and that seemed to be kind of a natural sort of border or
so
breaking
not
point.
to include where Wags and Whiskers are
And Starbucks
and those other restaurants in there.
Yeah.
That does, I mean, again, open for discussion, but that clearly feels like it's the downtown of El Segundo.
Yeah. Well, that particular property was recently redeveloped, where Starbucks is, with a mixed-use project.
Right, but since
so
we're
it seemed
redoing
like,
this, since we're redoing this, how does other than staff make a suggestion? How does it get implemented to then take a look at furthering the inclusivity of that area?
When you say furthering the inclusivity, you mean adding more properties to the study?
Adding, as I described, all the way up to Because that's where any retail services, restaurants stop, at the Beach Academy, Baseball Academy, and the fish restaurant. I mean, I'm sure, I haven't asked, but I'm sure that they would appreciate being an integral part of what's considered downtown with reference to marketing or any of the other future things that we're going to want to work on.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is something that we can look into as far as working with the other property owners, coordinating on marketing and things of that sort. At this time, including those additional properties in this study would require redoing a lot of different studies.
But that's what we're doing right now, right? We're in that.
If I just interject, if the commission recalls, we identified the parameters of the downtown specific plan and this particular project about a year ago.
I do remember.
We did not discuss expanding it beyond this. The prompt of our question was including this Rite Aid up to the Rite Aid property.
We did discuss it, Michael.
Yeah, well, we didn't discuss east of the Rite Aid property. That was not a consensus of what should be in the scope, and so that's why we never pursued it.
Interesting, because it wasn't really a vote, it was just more of a discussion.
Right, and so we took that discussion and ran with consensus of what that scope would entail. I'm not disagreeing with your points. I think that there's also a natural break. I think when you think about these properties and you envision the grand shopping center where Starbucks is, does that look like the rest of downtown? Does it feel like the rest of downtown? If you look at across the street, does it look like the rest of downtown on Main Street or Richmond? Does it have the same vibe? Does it have the same feel?
Oh, I would have to say 100% yes, just like if you went as far west as you could on Grand Avenue.
Right. So the other things we would consider, and those are just things that we should consider. The other things we consider is when we were looking at the Rite Aid property and the Chase Bank property, we were considering what would trigger potential redevelopment. And as Paul mentioned, the Grand Shopping Center with Starbucks has already gone through a major redevelopment. They just went through a significant facade improvement within the last 18 months. It's probably not palatable to expect them to reinvest and rehab or refurbish in a major way and demolish or rebuild, whereas we would expect maybe Rite Aid, if there's an appropriate floor area ratio, if there's appropriate development density or development incentives, we might realize a redevelopment at that site. And so when we were looking at the boundaries, we're also looking at, is it worth incorporating this property? Because is there a realistic capacity for them to actually reinvest into this property? And that's also the opposite of why we would not include a property, because if it's not going to re-incentivize some sort of reinvestment, we don't want to spend the time and money studying it because it's not likely to happen. So there's a lot of variables that we considered when we stopped at Rite Aid, but when we did bring the item for discussion about a year or so ago, and we said this is a scope, we're looking at incorporating Rite Aid, there wasn't, from my recollection, and I could be remembering it wrong, there wasn't a lot of deliberation about going beyond eastward past Rite Aid. So that's why we haven't included it tonight, and that's why Paul's a little bit reluctant to absorb that now, because we're halfway through the environmental study, if not further, and that would require a pretty significant rewrite. So that's why we're at where we're at now. Doesn't mean it can't be incorporated in the future, but that's just a little bit of context to why we're here with this particular parameter.
And immediately adjacent to Rite Aid, is that the start of Smoky Hollow?
Yes, yeah.
Is it immediately across the street?
To the south, yeah. Immediate to the south, yeah. With
So,
that, yeah.
But just to clarify, does that include the shopping center on Grand, or does it start on the south side of the shopping center of Grand? The Smoky Hollow?
Smoky Hollow is directly south of Rite Aid. Yeah, doesn't include the Rite Aid shopping center.
Right, not on the east side of Eucalyptus, essentially.
I remember Standard being confusing, how much of Standard should be a part of downtown versus Smoky Hollow.
Right, that border.
Anyway, Paul, carry on.
Okie doke. So just a quick word of what we'll cover in our presentation today and perhaps at a next meeting. Just a little bit of background of how we got to this point today. We'll go over the specific plan contents, which is the bulk of this presentation. covering private property development standards and uses, and then moving on to sort of public property, public realm, streets, and public properties. And then we'll, spend some time discussing all that, and we'll, at the end of the presentation, we can go over sort of next steps in the process, so you kind of have a sense of what's coming next. So just a little bit of background, and I won't take a long time to go over this. We initiated the project in late 2021. In earnest, it was early 2022. We did a lot of studies of existing conditions on the ground in the downtown, analysis on real estate market demand, traffic assessments, parking assessments, historic resources assessments. We initiated our community outreach process, had several meetings, multiple rounds of interviews with stakeholders. We initiated an online survey, and we had a big response to our online survey. We had a community workshop here last November, did an update to the city council earlier this year, and here we are today. So we put in a lot of time and effort into reaching out to the community to get their input. After the last study session, the consultant team and staff worked on some design concepts, and then started drafting the specific plan document and started the studies that go into the environmental impact report. So a little bit of information on what's in the specific plan. These are the main chapters in the specific plan. Introduction, private realm standards, public realm standards, and my slide is a little cut off at the bottom. There's a chapter on infrastructure, the implementation plan, and administration of the specific plan. So the introduction of the specific plan, the main purpose is to replace this existing specific plan, sort of updated with a new vision for the downtown area, an updated vision, and put in place regulations and plans to realize that new vision. That's the vision statement, but in summary, the downtown is the heart of El Segundo. It provides an attractive destination for all families to stay, play, and relax. Building from this starting point, the vision, which is based on our research and input from the community that we've had so far, is to create an economically prosperous downtown with a mix of uses, entertainment options, and other elements that sort of tie the community together. The introduction and vision chapter elaborate more on this vision and provide some more principles for the downtown development. The chapter on private realm deals with land use and development standards. It all starts with zoning, so that's number one. So we have proposed and developed 4 zoning districts in the downtown area, each with its own sort of character and purpose. On the one in the sort of pink or violet color is the Main Street District. The one that's red is the Civic Center District. On the top right in light blue is the Grant Avenue District, and west of the alley between Main and Richmond is the Richmond Street District. So they all have a little bit different character. On Grand Avenue, for instance, there's larger properties that perhaps have a little bit more potential for new development, so the standards there are a little bit different. There's some differences in the permitted uses between the Main Street District and the Richmond Street District, which we'll go over in a little bit, but just wanted to give you a sense that there's reason for the different zoning districts that you see in front of you. First thing to regulate is really the permitted uses in each of the zoning districts. There's a new table that has permitted uses listed for each of the zoning districts that organizes things fairly clearly. There are a lot of similarities. A lot of the same uses are permitted as they are today in the same locations. There are a few differences and changes, and I'm going to highlight some of the main aspects here. An example is that we're proposing alcohol service at restaurants along in the Main Street district to be permitted without going through a special use permit, just to kind of encourage the development of restaurants. We're proposing for sort of breweries to be permitted with a special use permit in Richmond Street and Grand Avenue districts. There is a brewery in downtown. It seems to be successful. Staff thought that this might be a good idea to incorporate in other parts of downtown in conjunction with either a restaurant or on-site service. Daycare centers, which were not listed before, will be permitted in certain parts of the downtown. Recreational entertainment facilities and theaters would be permitted. Some are today, but we're just expanding that to other parts of downtown. One change that in the permitted uses is in order to kind of make Main Street more of a focus of the retail part of the downtown, to permit offices on Main Street, but not on the frontage along Main, to be in the rear part or perhaps the second level of a building. That way we're reserving space for more retail and other uses along the grade level, along the sidewalk. Fitness centers, they are permitted today, but we're incorporating a limit to the size, especially in the Grand Avenue district, which has large parcels. We just want to make sure we don't get something like a large LA Fitness to kind of take over one big space. We just want to keep them small that fit within the community.
Can I ask a question, Paul?
Yes.
Can you go back one slide, please?
Yes.
I guess I just have a question about offices on Main Street permitted above or behind primary street frontage. I love it. But we've talked about that over the course of my being in this community. And when a property owner would have a business, a property, and he would try to lease, but couldn't lease, and there was office space. He had a potential client for office space and wanted to rent to somebody that's in office space that doesn't fall in that category. Is this like a legal and binding thing? In other words, it's owned by private property, there's a person that owns it, and I can't get retail or restaurant or any of the other permitted services. It costs me a lot of money. I'm going to rent to who I bloody want. How legal and binding is this? I mean, how does that work?
Well, it is binding. There's a couple of thoughts that I have on that. Number one, there may be existing offices, for example, on Main Street that face the front. And if this plan goes forward and is adopted, those uses will become illegal non-conforming. So someone could, close their office and another office could move into that same space, and just take over the same space. So that would be perfectly permitted and legal. So that's number one. So the non-conforming rights, in other words. Another thought that I have, and perhaps this is something that the commission can consider, give us input on, is to perhaps look into situations where that occurs, where there's a long-term vacancy. There's special situations where we might be able to either make exceptions or, create a set of circumstances where, if it's justified, we could approve an office use, even in the front. But the intent here is to help promote retail uses and other uses on Main Street. So if there are extreme circumstances, perhaps there might be a way for us to look into that, and we'd love to hear from the rest of the commission and the public about that topic.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Paul's mentioning, because I think this is a really delicate balance, and I think Commissioner Newman, you've made very pointed points in the past about the need to prioritize retail on Main Street, or just in general. And but we all know the retail environment is morphing, right? It's been changing, and you're probably the best subject matter expert on us, for us, this group tonight, to help us understand that. But to your point just now, sometimes it's difficult for some of these property owners, and when we develop these standards, we develop them, and they're stagnant. They're living documents, but they're stagnant. They're static. They exist as it is in that moment, and they don't morph in real time. So as a property owner struggles to lease a space, we're not able to be as reactive in making tweaks to address a changing economy or a changing market in the retail world or the brick and mortar world. And so what Paul is suggesting, I think is a great idea for the commission to maybe deliberate on. Is there appetite to develop some level of flexibility, either on a staff discretionary level or some parameters that come to the commission to make some sort of exception or evaluation that happens when those circumstances exist, that the commission can weigh in. Okay, rule of thumb, 9 days out of 10 is that this is what we want. We want to prioritize retail on Main Street. But in these scenarios, let's reconsider it. Let's look at it as a body from a policy perspective. What's the market doing? What's the economy doing? Has a space sat empty for 10 years and they just can't find a tenant? And so I think it's a valuable tool that we can incorporate into this document that hasn't existed previously. It's just food for thought.
Okay, thank you. Moving on from the permitted uses, the next thing that's regulated in this chapter is the development standards, what applies to new buildings or additions that are going in. So the chapter has a table where it organizes the standards really well, and they're very clearly laid out. And in addition to that, there are diagrams showing exactly what that standard is intended to do. So we have language in the table that says, for example, buildings shall be oriented towards Main Street. And we have a picture there that kind of gives to somebody who's reading the document kind of an idea. Okay, what do we mean when we say that, oriented towards Main Street? So it's easy for somebody to understand what that standard says. So this is very helpful in this new document. The picture on the bottom there, there's a standard that says the setback in the front should be 0. The building should be right on the front property line. But if a building has a outdoor dining area or a pedestrian type of plaza space that's about 10 feet deep, they can have that. Well, the picture kind of helps explain what that table is trying to say. So it's very nice how the book is actually organized, so it can explain the standards. Just giving you a few highlights on the development standards that might be a little different from the existing specific plan. There's no specific limit on the commercial floor area, that goes onto a property, or the residential density the way it is today in the specific plan. So basically, the setbacks, the building height, and those standards, the parking, kind of regulate how much you can build onto a property, how many units or how much square footage of commercial space. Because we're allowing multiple residential units potentially on one property in the Main Street and Richmond districts, there are standards for private open space, common open space, things that we did not have before in the existing plan because we would allow 1 unit per lot. There's height limits. So an example is the ground floor should be a minimum height of 14 feet just to provide, or actually a height of 14 feet to provide some space on the ground floor. There's height limit regarding the building overall, 30 feet in the front and then a step back of 10 feet and going up to 45 feet behind that. Today, that step back is 25 feet, so we've kind of changed that. And I'll show you what that looks like in the next slide here. So this is kind of an idea. Again, this is taken from the specific plan that shows that this is what we mean when we say we need to have a height of 14 feet minimum for the ground floor uses. And then this is just kind of a visual of what we mean when we say 30-foot height limit in the front, a 10-foot step back that can go up to 45 feet in height. On Main Street, there's an opportunity because typically Main Street sits a little higher than the alley behind it. So it's fairly easy to fit in a building that's perhaps up to 45 feet without overwhelming the street in front of it on Main Street.
One question. So if we have a maximum of 30 feet at street edge, but the ground floor has to be 14 feet, are you really getting 2
You can get 2 stories perhaps in the front, but behind it, behind the 10-foot step back, you could get a third story. Does that answer your question?
It does. I just, in 16 feet, you're really getting 2 livable stories. You're gonna have 8 foot. I just don't know how that becomes residential.
Oh, I see.
That first floor is 14 feet,
Uh-huh.
and then you have 16 feet remaining.
Yes.
Unlikely that you would have 2 residential stories above that.
Yeah,
Not above the first 10 feet of the building.
it would probably look a lot like this.
But it would
where
step back.
On the left, you're
Got
seeing.
it, on
yeah.
the back, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So in the front, just so that there's no, just so the building is not 45 feet tall, perhaps, right at the property line, to provide some visual relief from the street level, the buildings are supposed to kind of step back, and that's in the existing specific plan. I hope that kind of answers your
So
question.
kind of on that, so the 14-foot first floor
Yeah.
only applies to the street side? Or is there some, because the residential behind it is definitely not 14 feet, right?
Right, so, give me 1 second here. Yeah, so the finished floor, it says minimum 14 feet ground floor, yes. Now, on this next image, that retail space in the front is not necessarily 14 feet tall. It may be taller, but I think I see,
Do you see how the residential, that first floor residential
Is lower.
continues? That's, yeah.
yes. So I'm glad you're pointing that out, because that might be something that we may need to tweak a little bit and say the frontage, the front unit perhaps, and along Main Street should be at least 14 feet tall. And then kind of provide some language for if there's residential behind it, so that it can be lower perhaps. Yeah.
Right, and from just a design feasibility standard, if you're trying to keep floor plates the same, it's gonna be tricky. You're not gonna get 2 levels of residential in a 14-foot ceiling height.
Right,
And then you create, it's not gonna stack,
Yeah.
great.
just from a buildability.
I think we need to ask for a little bit of a different iteration probably of this drawing, because
Yeah.
the graphic, the envelope, the building envelope here with that dashed allowed building height line, because you're only talking about the first 10 feet. You're not gonna get that second story in that, well, really the third story in that second, or that first 10
Yeah.
feet. So, but if you moved back 10 feet, I'm wondering, even with a 14-foot height, the additional 45 feet, once you go 10 feet back, you may achieve a portion of a third story there, but then you can see it taper down a little bit. So it would be help, just for illustrative purposes, and the clarification that you made in the language
Yeah.
might help, you know, because the single floor plane is important from a cost perspective.
Exactly.
And it's already probably walking a fine line in terms of penciling, so that's something we have to be cognizant of.
Great. Thank you for pointing that out. So some of the other standards here, going on to the Grand Avenue District, they're a little bit different because, as I mentioned, the Grand Avenue District has some larger properties that may see some new development of a larger scale. So the differences compared to the Main Street and Richmond Street District are that the building height is taller. It's 60 feet proposed with a 10-foot step back also. There's more residential open space required. There's a landscaping requirement introduced because these are larger properties. Going on to the Civic Center District and the development standards there, there's more flexibility there. This is the Civic Center. We're talking about the height limit is 60 feet. Building orientation, assuming that there was an addition or things of that sort, or something new built, should face toward Grand and Main. Landscaping standards, parking, there's a recommendation in the specific plan to potentially put in a parking structure along Grand and Standard Street. There's also some Civic Center Plaza design recommendations that follow some of the same principles or direction we gave the students who gave their presentations earlier. But there's no specific design for the Civic Center Plaza in the specific plan.
Paul, would you repeat the parking structure at Grand and Standard?
Yes, so there is a recommendation, as part of addressing parking in the downtown, the demand and the supply, for the city to look into potentially putting in a parking structure.
Which corner?
It's
Which land?
the corner over there, Main and Grand, going east, not right at the corner, but going back towards Standard Street. So there's a parking lot there that's primarily for fire and police.
Uh-huh.
And that's the location of the recommended potential parking structure.
How many levels are you recommending for that parking structure? How many spaces? Do you have any idea on that?
Not the specific number of spacers or levels. The district, as designed right now, allows a 60-foot height limit. So in theory, it could be several levels. But this is something that has not been kind of studied from that engineering point of view. So we can look at the details. But that is one potential location where we could provide a parking solution in downtown.
Who makes those recommendations? I know that it's staff, right? It's you guys who get into the nitty-gritty of the information that sort of comes, and you sort of peel away and say, okay, this would be great, because you've chosen that spot over a spot, say, Franklin and Richmond, say.
Well, that's coming down a little bit later in the presentation.
Okay. So that is, maybe that's a recommendation as well?
Yeah.
So, I'm just curious.
Well, to answer
you
your
guys,
question
'cause
about
that's-
how it's decided or how it's
Yeah, I'm just
determined.
curious so that we all know how that gets pulled out, and then we think this particular area, which it could be used, it's great. I'm just curious how that really gets.
A couple quick things about
Sure.
that, Commissioner Newman. It will be part of the second part of the presentation about public properties and the public realm. But just to give you a quick sort of preview of that, we do have a consultant team that has been assisting staff with preparing the draft-specific plan, and they did a study of the current parking conditions, and they also did a study kind of projecting what the future parking demands will be in the downtown area, how much parking we have today, how much more parking we may need in the future, and based on that information, they suggested that the city could consider parking structures in the downtown to kind of provide additional supply.
Can I ask you too, Paul, is there factual information that the consultants have provided the city staff that fewer cars will be on the road, that fewer parking spots will be needed in downtown areas like ours in the future? And the future means what, 10 years or 50 years? I don't know. But is that part of what we are finding?
They did
like what Jay says, everybody's going to turn to bicycles. And we got electric bikes now that are just like little mini motorcycles, so they're very cool. Jay's very happy, I'm sure.
Well, admittedly, that is very, very hard to predict.
Of course.
But our consultants did the best they could based on.
But are they recommending that we are going to need fewer parking spots throughout our downtown corridors?
Their study shows that we will need more parking than we currently have in the downtown.
Okay.
So they estimated some numbers.
Okay.
And they provided some suggestions on how we might be able to meet that demand. Ultimately, things may develop differently from what we study today, and we may need less parking in the future, but they did the best they could with the information that we have on hand.
There's some interesting projects on converting a parking structure to something like residential or retail, or, where you could build it out that way, potentially. For our future generations of people
Right,
who
or
don't use cars.
Yeah, like I heard where they're converting some empty real estate into pickleball. Did you hear that? things like Bed Bath & Beyond. Not that we have that issue, but I just think it's funny. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay, great. So the regarding the Civic Center area, there's some recommended enhancements to the plaza or the open spaces at the Civic Center, including the Civic Center Plaza here, the corner of Main and Holly, and then potentially creating a little plaza at the corner of Grand and Main. Okay, I think this was a duplicate slide, so my apologies. Okay, so moving on, in addition to the specific development standards, there is a chapter or a section that has sort of common design standards for the downtown area overall and covers some other topics as well. So examples are building modulation requirements or roofline variation requirements. So there's some exhibits in the specific plan that give you a sense of, well, what do we mean when we say we want to have modulation? So the exhibit here, just as the text in the specific plan explains, okay, you can't have a building that is flat for more than 50 feet in a row. You have to have some sort of a break, you know, in your design, okay, so that we don't have that sort of uninteresting building elevation. Other standards include primary entrances, how they are designed, window and glazing standards for the front of buildings. We also did an assessment on potential historic resources in the downtown area, and our consultant identified at least 4 structures that appear eligible to be in a historic resources register. Would you be able to guess what structures those are?
Trying to figure it out.
Okay. Let's see. Let me get the next image on here. So this those 4 structures. So it's the jailhouse, that was a good guess. The Purcell building at the corner of Main and Grand, the old town music hall, and right down the street from there, this building, I really like it. It looks like an old Western saloon. And that seems to be the oldest building, built in 1915. So these particular buildings, the consultant recommends that the city maybe should consider actually officially designating them as historic resources. The city could also sort of designate a historic district or multiple historic districts around these buildings, because there are a lot of other older buildings around them, and there may be value in sort of grouping them all together in a historic district. So I just wanted to kind of give you that idea, and as you read through that particular section of the specific plan, you may come up with some thoughts or suggestions. Yeah, do we want to protect these older buildings and kind of maintain their character, you know, the old red brick buildings? Do we want them to keep the red brick and the metal fenestration and so forth? This is an opportunity to go in that direction if the city wants to. Other standards include parking regulations we haven't touched yet, signs, outdoor dining, so we'll cover a little bit of that here. As far as parking standards, not a lot of major changes in the general provisions for parking in the downtown. For example, today we don't require any additional parking if you're changing uses from one permitted use to another. The new specific plan, or the proposed specific plan, has the same provision, although it places a limit in the building size. So if you have a larger building, more than 10,000 square feet, in that case, you would have to provide the additional parking. There's a new required parking table. There's some reductions in the amount of parking required for uses in the downtown. This is just a little sampling of some of the differences, and I've listed the uses that are examples here. In the middle is the proposed requirement, and then on the right side is the current requirement of the downtown specific plan. So for instance, for retail, there's a lower parking requirement in this draft specific plan. compared to today. The same thing for office. There's an asterisk next to office and retail, because if it's a larger building, so if we're getting development, let's say in the Grand Avenue district on those larger parcels, well, in that case, we would require a higher parking ratio. Those buildings in the Grand Avenue district would have to provide more parking on site, so if they have larger buildings. Restaurant spaces, again, lower parking requirement. Outdoor dining, there is an exception today for outdoor dining areas up to 200 square feet. In the draft specific plan, we're increasing the size of that exception to allow up to 500 square feet of outdoor dining without providing extra parking. It's kind of an incentive to encourage more outdoor dining uses in the downtown.
Excuse me, how do those requirements compare with other downtown districts? Culver City, Manhattan, Hermosa?
Compared to other cities?
To other downtown districts, the parking requirements?
I will give you a general answer because I have not studied the neighboring cities or other cities in the area, but many cities provide big exceptions to their downtown areas when it comes to outdoor dining parking. And that's the idea, is to encourage more outdoor uses, more pedestrian activity. So in some cases, there's zero requirement. In other cases, they require the regular parking. But in a lot of cities, in their downtowns or along the beach frontage, they provide exceptions for outdoor dining.
Mari, did you mean outdoor dining, or did you mean in general? How does this city, this compare to other cities?
In general.
In general, across the board.
Across the board.
Yeah, we have not done a city-by-city comparison. We worked with our consultants and their traffic and parking experts, and proposed these parking rates in this plan, partly from a certain perspective to encourage, new development, redevelopment, to encourage filling those vacancies, in the downtown faster. But also because in the long run, we hope to provide other parking solutions, as I mentioned earlier.
That was my question. So is the thought of the parking structure to offset, right, to provide parking that might be in demand, even though our code has been reduced in parking requirements?
Yes, and a lot of places, a lot of downtowns or tourist areas like to sort of promote the idea of parking once and then visiting many destinations in a particular neighborhood. So that's part of the reasoning behind that.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So these are some of the main differences in the parking requirements, the number of parking spaces required. There are parking structure design guidelines in this section of the specific plan, guidelines regarding loading and service areas. Now, moving on to the outdoor dining topic, the specific plan has several pages worth of guidelines and standards with regard to the design of outdoor dining areas. So staff spent some time and wanted to make sure, and is proposing sort of a more detailed review, thorough review of outdoor dining areas, just to ensure that we have quality design in our outdoor dining areas. During COVID, we had a lot of restaurants, expand their outdoor dining, and it was done quickly, to address an emergency situation. But what we would like to is, in the future, in a more sort of organized manner, taking our time, spend the time and design some outdoor dining areas that are really quality. Yeah, so that's the intent behind that. So there's standards in there regarding the barriers, their materials, their colors, their height, furniture, tables and chairs, again, their materials, colors, and so forth, shade structures, the type of lighting, pedestrian access, meaning reserving space along the sidewalk for pedestrians to go through so that the outdoor dining is not sort of impinging in that, encroaching that pedestrian area. Even standards to protect adjacent businesses so that their visibility from the street is not obscured by an outdoor dining area next door. This covers the standards and the content in the specific plan dealing with private properties. From this point forward, we would be going into sort of the public realm. So I think that this might be a good natural point to kind of take a pause and maybe have a discussion, take some public comment, and if the commission desires, we can either continue or continue the meeting today, or take the rest of this perhaps at your next meeting. So I will leave it up to you. So if you'd like to ask questions, provide feedback, or invite members of the public to give us their comments, this is a pretty good point to do that.
Okay, and question about the public comment period, is that part of this?
This is a study session, really, so it's, you're welcome to invite public comment as you feel necessary.
We'll do it like former Chair Baldino did last time. We'll talk about the blue butterfly a lot. I would love public comment, so
Okay, great.
I think
I'll
that's
have a
great.
seat over
Okay.
there, and I'll leave the podium for whoever wants to come and participate.
You all have waited this long, so now you have to come speak. You could introduce yourself.
Hello all, my name is Alex Schuster. I'm a resident 339 Penn, and first time here, so very excited to be a part of it, and very passionate about the future downtown plan of El Segundo. I'm with Commissioner Newman on the push of the extent of the downtown plan to Ollie's Fish Co. and up to the baseball area. Just thinking about, are we thinking about, is this plan a 20-year plan? So what's the future thinking versus the now thinking? Understanding your comments about the recent developments, but in 5 years from now, when the town starts getting redone, are we now going to have inconsistency and not cohesion within the area? Talking about the Smoky Hollow downtown plan, now you have a segment that is left out. So from a cohesion standpoint, I think that is a push for us to continue to think on. So I appreciate your comments there. But that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Pedersen. I have Tappy Zone in the corner of Main and Pine. Really excited about what I'm hearing tonight. Civic Center, the art. I've always felt the city needed a little bit more of that. Paul, I'm listening to you too about how the city's being broken up. I like the idea of landmarking a few buildings, keeping the charm of the streets. I like the creativity that's going on with keeping the storefronts and making them interesting for retail. Because all I can say for being here 4.5 years and only open for a year and a half and still observing and still trying to crack the code to get as much business as we can get, I have all the confidence in the world. The city is coming along very nicely, and I'm meeting a lot of people, and you have such an eclectic group of people, the aerospace people, the very interesting people, and the exciting thing that got into my head about 4 months ago, was Christina and Kristen with the marketing team came into my restaurant, and we were talking about, well, I've always been talking about Main Street, how we have to look at Grand in one way, but how do you pull it up to where I'm at in the north? There's a lot of interesting storefronts there, mainly office, mainly dentists, gyms. Needs to be a little bit more retail. I like what you're talking about with restaurants, cafes, to have a little bit more vibrancy on Main Street. Very excited about that because it all, also as I've been involved in development in New York City, Union Square in particular, developing the area on a board for 25 years, it just takes a couple little retailers, just a couple that take a chance, and landlords taking a chance. And I know on Main Street you only have 1 or 2 main landlords, but they have to be a little bit more open-minded maybe, be a little bit more patient, because I think what happens, what I've seen in other cities also, is something like what Elmira and I created, we loved this city when we came here, not knowing anything about it, and creating a restaurant that's very important to, I think, the North Corner, and also being very thoughtful about design, landscape, all these kind of things to create an interesting entrance into Main Street. We're very cognizant of design and also the elements of what make community, especially me, in communities in New York. So I don't want to say too much more, but I'm really excited about what I'm hearing, and I know that you're talking about a lot of things, and I'm glad to be a little bit involved with this and give you my fresh eyes with what I see. So thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Chris Hall. I live on Mariposa over by the elementary school. Actually, both elementary schools are by the Center Street Elementary School. I was here last time. I did not talk about blue butterflies, but today I'm here to talk about, today I just want to say that, I said this last time, there's nowhere in the world where people are trying to tear out walking streets and replace them with driving streets. There's no one that's ever reduced the amount of cars to increase pedestrian traffic who has been disappointed later. It's all going one direction. Last time I said that the ideal number of, I know we didn't cover streets. I was hoping for some
come
streets.
back next time.
I hope I can. Got the babysitter tonight just to be here. But I would say, to the extent that we can focus more on walking, the better. I would propose Main Street be a walking street completely, and that the more that we can get away from focusing on cars, and I understand the parking concerns and people work about parking, but to your point, I think cars are going out of fashion, so to speak, over time. I think especially in a town like this, assuming that weather ever recovers, there's a lot more walking, a lot more biking. And I would also suggest that the PCT towers have enormous parking lots that literally no one is in. And I went to the Ed Gala last week. Afterwards, you could hop on those little bus thing that took us right back to downtown, and it was great. It's easy enough, and I know during the day I think there still are some buses that do that, but it's easy enough to create parking that isn't on this space. You think about 3rd Street in Santa Monica, and people park at a parking lot that's way on one end that's far away, and then they walk in. So whether it's whatever the fewest amount of driving cars are and the most space for walking would be my thought.
Thank you, Chris. In terms of dais conversation, I mean, the 3 items that I think that I tagged for us to circle back on are the boundaries, some level of conversation on what an exception for office frontage on Main, and then a question I had about the historic properties that we talked about. I very much value Old Town Music Hall and the structure of those buildings. I am personally a little reluctant to place them on anything that would put them on a historic registry, just because we would be extremely limited in what we could do in the future. So I'm curious if there's something that presents a hybrid, so they don't get tagged as being on the National Historic Registry, but we are cognizant of preserving some portion of that structure.
If I may just start there, the city wouldn't be able to register it as a national landmark, only as a local landmark.
Okay.
Yes.
And then would that come with limited development standards, or just is a nod to us to have a higher level of design?
It would mean that if we were to alter those buildings in any way, we would have to follow the Secretary of Interior architectural standards, so that we don't do something that detracts from its character. So additions could be made, but they would have to be in a way that is compatible with the existing building. You wouldn't be able to, stucco over existing brick. So there would be certain limits to what alterations could be made.
Is there anything right now in the specific plan?
Pardon me?
Is there anything right now written in the specific plan? Yes.
There are some standards today in the existing specific plan. Yes. They don't go to the same extent as far as limiting alterations, but there are some incentives for not demolishing or not substantially altering. Designating...
We've experienced that in this town, haven't we? Where there was a building that was torn down that needed to be rebuilt to its previous look, if you will. The city is up on Richmond Street. Does that ring a bell?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that particular case.
Next to Richmond Barn Grill, there was a, yeah?
There was a building, yeah, that was demolished, and a new building that went up at the corner. Is that the
Yeah.
building you're referring to?
Yeah.
That building went through a design review process,
Uh-huh.
and staff worked with them so that they could incorporate some of those.
Or was it Richmond Barn Grill?
It's right at the corner. I
Yeah,
don't,
no, I'm just
yeah.
trying to think back.
So city staff encouraged the property owner to incorporate some of those elements that you find in older buildings in the
Right.
downtown in their design.
Right.
And I believe that came before the planning commission as well. And so the design, incorporates brick and some design features that you might find in other older buildings in downtown. I hope that helps answer your question.
So does whether or not we try to get them to be, I guess, a city historic resource, that's not included in the plan, right? We don't make or is that decision made in the plan?
The decision is not made in the plan, but that's something for us to consider. Do we want to officially?
As part of the plan.
Do we want to designate them? We could make that, we could go through that process to designate them as a local historic resource.
So we don't have an existing local historic resource. It's not written now.
There's,
It's just that there are design standards.
today, yes,
For older buildings, or is it just?
Yeah. Today in the downtown specific plan, there are certain properties that are identified in there that,
Okay,
where
well,
there's some incentives
That's what
for
we're saying. That's what you were asking.
preserving
Yeah.
them, yeah. Mhm. Yeah, but they're not officially designated as historic resources. They're just identified as older buildings that there's some incentives in there to kind of help preserve them.
Incentives, but not requirements. So I guess this would be, we're adding a requirement to
Yeah.
preserve some portion of it. Okay.
I'd also, I'm refamiliarizing myself, Paul, with this, and I don't know how much into the weeds you've gotten into this in the draft plan, and it mentions a required historic resources assessment report for any structures that are at least 45 years of age. The way it's currently written is that the city shall require. This is a little bit above and beyond what would typically be expected, and so I think if there's appetite to minimize the barriers, because it could be a heavier lift to do that depending on the structure at 45 years.
Just to jump in,
Yeah, go ahead.
Michael, there is a separate set of criteria in the municipal code for historic preservation where you as a body can designate what are called historical resources, and there's a 50-year threshold there. So one idea might be that what's being proposed could be advisory and applied concurrently or maybe subsequently to this specific plan consideration under the guidance of their power in the code to designate cultural resources. And how that would play out is that there would be restrictions on alterations, demolition, things of that sort, with indicated exceptions for public health and safety or economic hardship. But the point it being that you have that existing authority with an existing set of criteria that seems to be apart from what's baked into the draft plan. So my suggestion would be maybe to use your authority within the code to consider those potential cultural resources separately.
Meaning as they came up before us, not baking it into the specific plan.
Right, and you might take them piecemeal or as a whole separately, but I think you may want to consider them under our code instead of this separate set of criteria that seems to be baked into the draft.
So for context, it might make sense to leave some references to these fantastic structures, but maybe we lean on our existing standards.
Yeah, maybe there could be sort of a recommendation more than a shall mandate, and then there could be a cross-reference to the existing authority here.
That makes sense to me. Is there anything additional to kind of, and then we'll circle back for more discussion on some of the things Brenda brought up, but anything we haven't talked about?
Anything I just want to know the process, the upcoming process, because you mentioned that the draft is going to be out for a month or so. So what, do we have a set deadline, and what happens after that?
We don't have a set deadline, but we do have some time while we're working on the draft environmental impact report. I just thought that, you know, a good month would be a good amount to give people enough time to spend time reading through and providing us comments. And then afterwards, we can take all those comments and fine-tune the draft-specific plan before we finalize a draft environmental impact report. So that was kind of the intent there.
Yeah, if the commission recalls, and I know one wasn't here at the time, but we really struggled to get public participation in the beginning of this. And so, you know, Paul and Eduardo both thought that the more we can get this out there, you know, in front of the commission, online and put out there as much as we can, the better. And so it probably is working out for the better that we're going to break this up into a couple different discussions, because it'll just allow that much more time to digest. But we're literally in the home stretch. Generally, what would otherwise be happening at this moment, the draft would be out there. We're getting the environmental document wrapped up with the bow on it to be published. We'd receive public comment on that, and then we'd come back to the Planning Commission for deliberation and actual recommendations for adoption, or, you know, recommendations for denial, I guess, of the specific plan that would then go to City Council. And so otherwise, we're literally talking about the next couple of months, this thing being final. But we're trying to exhaust as many opportunities to be in front of the commission and opportunities for the members of the public to participate in this process, because the first few months, and I misspoke earlier, it wasn't a year, it was 6 months ago. It was last November that we were here with a sort of draft with RRM with their presentation. But the preceding 6 months, we had how many community meetings? Probably 5 or 6, either online, virtual, or in person. Yeah. That we maybe got 1 or 2 people here at a time, or a small handful, 5 or 6 people. And so we're really trying to continue the effort to get public participation, but we are in the home stretch.
And we want to, you know, give everybody the opportunity to participate, to let us know if there's things that can be fine-tuned or altered, because you all know that, you know, once something is adopted, people always come back and say, hey, you know, why did you do that? We should have been done differently. And then we wished we had heard from them. So this is us trying to exhaust every opportunity we have to get more input on the process, on the plan.
So you want to circle back to
Sure.
to the boundaries? How do we feel? I mean, I think you all know how I feel about it, but it feels like that would create some continuity. I don't know if it's, you know, like the benefits for including that area.
I think that's a good place to start, is what would the benefits be? If you look at development patterns, we're looking at a document that's intended to provide roughly a 20-year plan.
Well, I hear you, but you know, everybody was sort of aghast. Oh my God, Rite Aid in that area is not feeling included in part of downtown. Everybody just went, like, so what are the benefits for that?
So that the intention behind that was to incentivize redevelopment.
And why wouldn't we want to include?
It's more about the likelihood of it. That building, I couldn't put a dollar value on it.
Michael.
Well, I mean, it is
not.
subjective, but it's also, so that is one parcel, and it's large acreage. So the likelihood that is redeveloped significantly is much higher.
Higher, for sure.
Because you could have a single-story Rite Aid and you know, mixed use, something above, versus the blocks that are several smaller parcels. It just does have a higher likelihood of being significantly redeveloped.
So we discussed this with our RM at length, and they're not here because this was not a budgeted discussion. But we discussed this at length, and when they did their sort of economic analysis of what's the FAR, what's the residential density that actually facilitates redevelopment, we know for certain in these districts what does and doesn't, and that's how we landed with the densities that we're proposing. That's how we're landing with the FARs, which we're not tinkering with a whole lot, but that's also how we landed with these areas. Is they advised us on what the economics was and what would actually incentivize redevelopment. And so that's why we stopped at Rite Aid, because the degree of development that you'd have to incentivize, anything east, I get my directions backwards because I'm oriented to the map.
Can I make a request that the maps are directionally turned?
Anything east of Rite Aid, you'd be talking about a greater than Pacific Coast Commons project on that site in order for them to realize any rate of return on their investment. And that, when we were talking to RRM, is not in keeping with what we thought, and we might have been wrong, but what we thought the appetite was for development in the downtown or downtown adjacent.
Well, that strip above the area that we're talking about where Starbucks is, there's a whole strip of older buildings there that would be like on Grand Avenue up there on the south side of the street that clearly need to be incentivized, shall we say.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just wondering if there's a different mechanism to facilitate that. The purpose of the downtown specific plan is to curate a particular environment, and as you expand that environment, you dilute what you're trying to create at the core. And so I'm wondering if the character of what you're talking about, of what could be incentivized, there might be a different mechanism than the downtown specific plan to do that. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I'm just saying that I'm not sure that this is the right tool. And I think it's good feedback, because after this is done, Paul's got all kinds of free time. Maybe
well,
I think that's the next
beyond
step.
the fact that it's going to require a lot of work on your part, if we could exclude that, is it a benefit? Should it be a part of the downtown specific plan, or should that remain a part of Smoky Hollow? I think that's the key. It doesn't feel like Smoky Hollow to me. It feels like Main Street.
So the part that you're talking about, I don't think is Smoky Hollow. Where's Station?
What is it?
It's in the C2 zone,
Yeah.
Just
the
general
neighborhood commercial.
Yeah.
Is there a benefit for those property owners or for those businesses up there to be a part of the downtown specific plan?
I think it's a good conversation that we might have had half a year ago. And
But forget if it's a half a year ago, because now's the time before it goes, is
you're
what
right.
I'm trying
And
to say.
if that's the consensus, then we have to go back and cost it out and go back to council and ask for funding.
Because we have to do all
We'd
of the
have to modify
reporting
the scope.
differently.
We'd have to modify the scope, which would modify this document, which would modify the CEQA document that's,
So who's going to benefit? That's the question. Will the businesses benefit, and will the property owners benefit? Would it be a boon to the people that live in this community? If putting the money aside, putting the fact that now all of a sudden we have to go back and add it because it's a pain, would it benefit? Is it the right thing to do? Is it the right thing to add it?
I think those are the right questions. I also wonder if the same question can be asked of any property in the C2 zone, of any C2 zone, regardless of where it's located. I think those questions need to be answered.
But what we're talking about, the downtown area. So we are talking about an area, we're not talking about the north or south end of Main Street. We're talking about Grand Avenue. We're not talking about Standard. We're talking about what would appear to be obvious in my head. It's just that.
Is your thought that anything that's retail or commercial on Grand should be part of the
There's a
downtown
demarcation
specific
line. It makes sense at the end of where the baseball academy is, and across the street.
If we extend it going up Grand it sounds like you want both sides of Grand. So that means that the skate park, there residentials, single family homes.
Scout House.
Yeah, that would
Scout
all
House.
fall into the
teen center.
downtown specific zone.
Yeah.
And how would those types of land uses and single family homes that would be covered in that, how would they be impacted if it was extended?
Well, there are no single-family homes in there.
That there are between.
If we are on the opposite side of Grand.
Yeah, between where the Starbucks Plaza is and the baseball field, there are a few single-family homes, I believe.
Right, there are.
Yeah. So how would they
Well,
be
are
impacted?
there? No. There are no houses up there.
Let me ask it a different way. Is there an alternative to expanding the boundaries that could separately address that doesn't require, from a budgetary perspective, the same level of study? If we're studying a smaller area, do you
We have
do
to ask
the
the
IR?
question. Yeah, we're not going to be able to know because I already know that we are beyond budget. I know that much. So whatever we ask RRM to do is going to cost more. I don't know to what degree that will be. And then the environmental consultant is a different piece of that. And so we'd also have to sort of pause that button. We're not talking about a huge geographic area that's going to monumentally change the data, but it's about redoing it and reanalyzing some of those numbers. And so it's time and cost, for their
So what are
staff
the
time.
benefits of being a part of a specific plan, as opposed to those businesses and property owners' properties up there
Well,
that aren't a part, other than just it being part of C2? Is there, how do they benefit?
It's really about what you envision. The specific plan is intended to implement what you envision for an area. So we haven't spent the time talking about Grand and what we envision for Grand. What we spent the last year doing, 6 months with the community meetings, and then the last 6 months after talking to the Planning Commission, is talking about what we envision within these parameters. We haven't talked about Grand beyond these parameters, and so we haven't had that conversation about what you as a commission and what council as a body envision for the rest of the grant. So it's hard to answer that question because I don't know how they benefit from it when I don't know what your vision for the rest of Grand is.
If I may add
So
one
why
more
would we
thing.
not want to include them as having,
When I guess
potential?
The question I think that you're asking is, why are they being restricted from also benefiting? But I don't see our role as deeming which property owners benefit from us, but it's creating an environment that is consistent with our vision for the city is our task.
Right,
We're
and
not-
I'm not trying to be supportive of those people to not include them, except that it's retail and there's commercial buildings up there that logically, it ends after the baseball academy. So why wouldn't you want to include them? We go all the way down on Grand Avenue the other way, west.
I think that from a land use perspective, the development patterns and the orientation of those properties this is only a personal, professional opinion, they don't align with the vision that the commission has set for the rest of downtown. It doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't belong in the downtown specific plan. It could be a different or an extension of a district, but we just haven't talked about that. We haven't spent the time talking about what your vision for the rest of that area is and whether, because it's clearly not the same as walking on Main Street, right? It's clearly not the same as walking on Richmond Street. But Grand, the way that it's envisioned in the specific plan is envisioned in a particular way, and I can't answer the question of whether we want that same development pattern to extend further on Grand or not.
I don't want to be splitting hairs about it being important or not. It just feels like it should be part of the downtown specific plan to me. I may be the only one who feels that way, and then that's fine. We'll leave it where it's at. I won't even be around probably in 20 years when it matters for those people, so whatever.
I think if it's worth us coming back to the commission and informing you at least what the implications are or what the next steps could be, we'd have to go back and have a conversation with the consultant team and look at the timeline. We also need to go to city council and ask because they are the ultimate decision-making body. That's the body who asked for staff to do this, and so I don't want to go spend money on something that there isn't a greater uniform of consensus, but it is a valuable question. I think it could be answered through this. I think it also can be answered through another mechanism, because from my own observation, the rest of Grand requires a lot of work from the whole stretch. And so it's just about what process it belongs in.
And it's just about what feels like downtown. Downtown doesn't just mean Main Street to me, or to most people that live here. It feels, Grand Avenue is very downtown anymore, because there's a lot of businesses that are there to include in the scope of what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, and that was the impetus of RRM's question when we came and said, hey, we're grabbing the Rite Aid site, was when you come into the city, those who live, work, do business here, when is that threshold of when you feel like you're in downtown? And that was the impetus of their question when we talked about this, is, even on north-south on Main Street, when is that moment you say, okay, I'm in downtown? And that's how the parameters were already somewhat developed from the previous specific plan, but that's what guided that conversation. Everybody's gonna feel a little bit something different, but RRM's job and our job was to help them find something.
You're at the beach and you come up Grand Avenue, you don't feel like you're in the downtown until you hit Main Street. So that it's an argument that is, I guess in everybody's opinion going to be a little bit different. But there's a lot. That's definitely, clearly a part of downtown, even though you don't feel like it until you're there. So that's my point. You're heading west, even though you don't feel like all of a sudden until you get to Rite Aid. That doesn't mean that that's not part of the downtown community. I'm fine if we don't include it.
I guess that's my next question. Is there consensus on including it?
It's up to you guys.
I'm reluctant to extend our cost and our time, but very much I like focusing on what else could be done at a later date on that particular section.
Yeah, I think it's a good discussion to have, and I think regardless of if it's going to cost money or not, I would like to keep the boundary right there, because I personally don't. I think it's a good eucalyptus is a good place to cut it off, and I think that downtown specific plans are meant to draw certain types of businesses and structures to that area for this downtown vitality. So if we were going to extend that, that would be in the Grand Zone, and I noticed that the Grand Zone allows for something like a 60-foot hotels. So I would not want somebody to buy up the baseball academy and put a hotel there, but that would be totally fine. But that wouldn't be in the character of that part of Grand versus this part of Grand that's closer to the downtown, what I consider the downtown area. So to me, I think that I would like for it to stay at that Rite Aid line.
Yeah. Talking about feeling, if I come from the beach on Grand, I feel that I'm entering downtown actually in Concord, and I feel like I'm living downtown in Standard. However, I'm totally okay with eucalyptus, and I wouldn't increase the boundaries past eucalyptus.
Okay. If I may just add one more thought. When the council adopted the Pacific Coast Commons specific plan last year, a couple of the neighbors said, hey, I like that too. I want to do the same thing. So, the property owners past eucalyptus could come to the city and tell us, hey, you know what? We want to be included too, So, and at that point, they could initiate a process, and you asked what are the benefits, and they can perhaps convince the city that, hey, there's a benefit to including our property, or our property needs to be revitalized too. We need different standards, and perhaps we can give them some of the responsibility for either including their property or finding some other way to help those properties be revitalized. It might not be being in the specific plan, but maybe it's an amendment to the standards for that district that helps kind of incentivize improvements.
But I'm problem. And I don't think we need to vote on it, since I'm the only one in the interest of not spending any more of the city's money or
anyway.
Time. Exactly. But it is on record that I would
very clearly. But I think the better point is that I think there's discussion that needs to happen down the road on what do we do with the in-between areas, and there's probably more than just this area to talk about.
I would agree. What about, do we need to circle back on, is there a decision to be made on office frontage on Main Street and kind of, what sort of discretion staff has to address that?
I think it would be fruitful discussion for us, only because in my tenure here and in other cities, it's always an inflection point when you adopt specific land uses and the market changes. What you have in mind today, and this is why we're going through what we are with the Smoky Hollow specific plan cleanup, but when you have in your mind those uses, without a doubt, within several years, things change, whether it's the market or a new use comes up that wasn't defined before. And staff is always put in a very difficult place at the counter because their job is to put things in a box. Because that's the only equitable and fair way of doing it, is trying to figure out what box does X fit into. But generally, that's not how the market works. The market works, and entrepreneurs and business owners are always trying to think, what can I do that's outside of the box? Because they're trying to do something unique. And so it's always a competing interest between staff and constituents on the other side of the counter. And so if there was a desire, and obviously I'm pitching it a little bit because I think that it's a valuable tool that would give the flexibility when the market changes or when uses change, to have an avenue that's a little bit less of a barrier than asking for a variance, which is pretty arduous, or have a process that's a little bit more seamless, either at a staff level or commission or council level, where there's an ability to allow some room for adjustments when it makes sense. Now, the question is, what are the circumstances that it makes sense?
And what is that, how would that process work? So if you have administrative approval, I know how that works, right? You have oversight, but what is the mechanism that planning commission can weigh in on that absent of a variance?
So similar to how we deal with administrative use permits or the minor adjustments that are, director makes a determination and it goes to planning commission for, it could be a receive and file, or you can look at and say, hey, Michael's off his rockers. We need to consider this as a commission. That it's one path. We could also utilize some other, administrative process, or not administrative, but a discretionary process that's not a variance, but allows you the ability to deliberate and make a determination. Wouldn't be a CUP or an AUP or a variance. It wouldn't even be a site plan. We'd probably have to come up with something, but it would be a discretionary action amongst commission if you wanted to bypass staff.
Thoughts on that? Difference between an AUP and some unknown discretionary to be created.
And if I may, I would just reiterate something that Michael just said. With the Smoky Hollow specific plan, it was adopted at the end of 2018. So in the last roughly 3.5 years or so, or four years or so, we encountered people at the counter asking, hey, can I have this use? Can I have that other use? And we are about 4 or 5 years away, and we're back making some tweaks. So what I'm saying is perhaps, this makes sense now, but in a couple of years, when we interact more with the development community, with property owners, realtors, we might find out that, well, maybe we should tweak this, make some changes. So may not need to create an exception today, but just be flexible in the future to make an amendment to the specific plan. So if we don't figure out a way to create an exception today or as part of the process today, we're always flexible, even after we adopt the specific plan, to make changes where it's needed.
So an AUP would come before planning commission as a consent item?
We could structure it however, I mean, really it's more about getting the appetite of the commission, because then we'll have to go back and say, okay, how do we accomplish that? And so if there's consensus, look, the director level's okay, but we want it to come before us to either pull it for a hearing or at least bless it, then we'll talk about what mechanisms we can do that. If there's a consensus that, no, you know what, in all cases, we want to see it and we want to deliberate, and so then we can go back and figure out what process does that look like. And then we'll ask City Council the same thing. Are you okay with Planning Commission being the final decision maker, or staff, or even if it goes from staff to commission, does planning commission want to be the final decision maker on these types of scenarios? And so we're just looking kind of where consensus is, and then our job is to figure out how to
Incorporate that.
make that happen, yeah.
Thoughts?
I mean, I'd like to make it as easy as possible and defer to you to either make the determination or, take it to the planning commission. Is that possible?
Yeah, that would be similar to our adjustment process, right? The AUP and then,
There's also the design review process in the downtown specific plan. The director may have authority to make a decision, but is also authorized to bump it up to you whenever he sees that it's worth it to get your feedback on something.
so you saw that method, even though it doesn't formally exist, but that's what we did for the pylon signs for Fogo de Chao, right? I was not comfortable making that decision myself, and so I kicked that to the planning commission. So it's not a formal in the rest of the city, but we used it
And we
anyway.
provided so much good feedback.
We did.
on that.
Well, instead of a 35-foot pylon sign, you got a 24-foot or 19-foot pylon sign.
Yeah, no, I like that, and I think, I trust your discretion to know if it's one isolated incident, but if you're gonna keep seeing that over and over, then that's something that needs to be elevated, so we're talking about potential changes in market demand. Anything uncovered, not discussed? Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right. Thank you, productive, thorough. Hopefully you've gotten the feedback that you need.
That's great, thank you so
And
much.
we will, anything that lingers, we can pick up too when we come back and talk about the public realm.
Yeah, and we'll report back to you on a few of these topics at your next meeting, and we can keep making tweaks.
Thank you, Paul.
You're welcome. And I think we chose a good break-off point time-wise and for having Jay at the next meeting.
Yeah,
as well.
I would agree, yes. He's gonna have some thoughts on,
Maybe.
on Grand and Main. Okay, report from Community Development Director,
No report, Chair.
City Attorney's Office,
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Planning Commissioner comments.
I have nothing to report at this time. Thanks.
No comments?
Okay, have a good Memorial Day weekend. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
All right.